Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress as I'm recording this video on the 6th of April 2021. It is less than 2 weeks to the resumption of the Candidates Tournament, which is very exciting. The tournament was broken off halfway after 7 rounds because of the coronavirus pandemic, and these are the 8 candidates that will play the second half of the event in April 2021. Clockwise from the top left, Fabiano Caruana, Ding Liren, Alexander Grishuk, Jan Nepomniachtchi, Kirill Alexeyenko, Wang Hao, Anish Giri and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And these are the standings after 7 rounds. Vachier-Lagrave and Nepomniachtchi lead the Candidates Tournament with 4.5 points out of 7 games. And they're followed by 4 players a full point behind: Caruana, Giri, Wang Hao and Grishuk. Ding Liren and Alexeyenko are at the bottom of the table with -2. On Chess to Impress, we're counting down towards the resumption of the Candidates Tournament by looking at all the 28 earlier candidate cycles in the history of the undisputed World Championship. It all started in London 1883, where Zukertort and Steinitz finished in the first 2 places. They played the first official World Championship match 3 years later. Steinitz gained a rematch against world champion Lasker in St. Petersburg 1895-1896, and Paul Keres from Estonia won the tournament in the Netherlands 1938 to qualify for a match against world champion Alyachin. That match never happened because of World War II. David Bronstein won the candidate cycle in Budapest and Moscow 1950 to challenge world champion Botvinnik the year after. Vasily Smyslov won 2 candidate cycles in 1953 and 1956, and Misha Tal was Botvinnik's next challenger. Tigran Petrosyan won the Candidates Tournament in Curaçao 1962. It was his turn to play Botvinnik. 1 year later, Petrosyan became world champion. Boris Spassky also won 2 cycles, and the great Bobby Fischer beat Tigran Petrosyan in Buenos Aires 1971 to qualify for the match of the century against Spassky. Anatoly Karpov beat Viktor Korchnoi in Moscow 1974 to qualify for a match against world champion Fischer. Fischer declined to play. Karpov became the 12th world champion by default. Korchnoi won the next 2 cycles and both times lost to Karpov in the World Championship match. Kasparov came on the scene by winning the candidate cycle in 1984. He beat Karpov the year after. Karpov came back, won 2 cycles. In total, Karpov and Kasparov played 5 World Championship matches against each other, and Nigel Short broke the Kasparov-Karpov era by qualifying in 1993 for the match against Kasparov. Anand was Kasparov's next challenger, and it should have been Alexei Shirov to play Kasparov after beating Kramnik in Cazorla 1998, but Shirov never got a match. Kramnik did and became the 14th world champion in the year 2000. Peter Leko was the next qualifier. He challenged world champion Kramnik and almost beat him in 2004. In 2007 a World Championship tournament was held and 4 players qualified for that tournament: Aronian, Gelfand, Grishuk and Leko. And this is in red because this video is about that candidate cycle. Anand became world champion, and Topalov, Gelfand and Carlsen were his next 3 challengers. Carlsen beat Anand, who came back by winning the next cycle for a rematch against Carlsen, and Karyakin and Caruana were Carlsen's last 2 opponents. They only lost in a tie-break, both of them. So who will it be? Who will win Yekaterinburg 2020-2021 to challenge Magnus Carlsen for the world title in November of 2021? You can tell me in the comment section who you think will win. Will it be Vachier-Lagrave or Nepomniachtchi, or will one of the other players make a great comeback? As mentioned, we're going to look at the World Championship tournament in 2007 and more specifically about the qualifiers for that World Championship tournament held in Elista also in the year 2007. This championship was unusual in that the World Championship was decided by a tournament rather than a match, and the last time that happened was in 1948. The FIDE World Championship 2005 was also a double round robin tournament, but at the time the world title was split. That 2005 tournament was for the FIDE World Championship, and with classical world champion Vladimir Kramnik refusing to take part. In this series we're focusing on the classical World Championship cycle. Soon after the 2005 tournament, FIDE announced that the 2007 World Championship would also be a double round-robin tournament. And in 2006, FIDE announced the World Championship 2006 to reunify the World Chess Championship. Finally, the chess world had been split since 1993. And because the organization of the 2007 tournament was largely in place, conditions of that 2006 match included that if the classical champion, Kramnik, defeated the FIDE champion, Topalov, Kramnik would take Topalov's place in the 2007 tournament. All very complicated. Kramnik won the 2006 match. After many adventures, you may remember Toilet Gate. And in June 2007, Kramnik confirmed that he recognized the 2007 tournament as the World Championship. FIDE later announced that the future World Championships, starting in 2008, would be decided by matches between a champion and a challenger. At the same time, FIDE announced that as compensation for being denied entry to the 2007 tournament, Topalov, the loser of the 2006 reunification match, would have special privileges in the 2010 cycle, to make it even more complicated. Now let's talk about that candidates tournament. One place in that event was reserved for the 2004 FIDE World Champion Rustam Kazimjanov, and 5 players were awarded to the 5 highest rated players, the average of July 2004 and January 2005 ratings, and those were Leko, Adams, Judith Polgar, Shirov and Bakro. The remaining 10 places went to the highest finishers at the 2005 World Cup, who had not otherwise qualified. The candidates tournament was held in Elista, Kalmykia in Russia, the home of FIDE president Ilyumzhinov, from the 26th of May to the 14th of June 2007. It consisted of a 2-round knockout, with 1 player qualifying from each quarter of the draw. Matches were best of 6 games at the normal time controls of 40 moves in 2 hours, then 20 moves in 1 hour and 15 minutes for the remainder of the game, plus a 30-second increment per move. Where matches were tied after 6 games, tie breaks were played on the 7th day. And this is what happened. In the first round, Aronian beat 16-year-old Magnus Carlsen. Shirov overcame Adams. Both those first 2 matches went to a tiebreak. Leko did not need a tiebreak, he destroyed Gurevich 3.5-half. And Bareyev narrowly overcame Polgar. In the bottom half of the draw, Wróblewski surprisingly beat Ponomaryov, Rishuk beat Malakhov, Gelfand beat Kazimjanov in a tiebreak, and Kamsky destroyed Bakro. In the second round, Aronian beat Shirov and qualified for the 2007 World Championship. Leko also qualified by beating Bareyev. Gelfand beat Kamsky, and Rishuk needed a tiebreak to qualify for that event. He beat Wróblewski. It's time to play some chess. In this video we're going to look at the first game from the Aronian-Carlsen match. White is Magnus Carlsen, black is Levon Aronian, and we know that Aronian qualified, so let's look at this game from the black side. It is the 27th of May 2007, game 1, and Carlsen opened with the e-pawn. e5 from Aronian, knight f3, knight c6. We have a Spanish opening. Let's put the first moves on the board. And here bishop e7. Aronian writes in the magazine New in Chess that he was hoping for rook e1, this move, so that he could play his beloved martial attack. After rook e1, then you play b5, bishop b3, black castles, c3, and then you can play the martial gambit with d7, d5. But rook e1 was not played by Carlsen, he played d3, and now the martial attack is no longer possible. b5, bishop b3, d6, a4 and rook b8. Aronian comments here that it was bishop d7 instead, which he had prepared when he played d7, d6 on a previous move. But then he rejected the idea because of c3, castling and bishop c2. Apparently Aronian did not like that, so he played rook b8 instead of bishop d7. Carlsen took on b5, recapture, and then knight c3. And Aronian writes, the knight is needed on c3 in order to meet the freeing bishop e6 with knight d5. That's why knight c3 had to be played here. Aronian castled, and now h3, which Aronian calls a useful move. The alternative is knight d5, and Aronian says white could probably also try for an advantage with this move, but after knight takes d5, e takes d5, knight d4, knight takes, e takes, Aronian writes, although in view of the symmetrical nature of the position, in this case black should gradually be able to equalize. So this also does not promise white an opening advantage. Carlsen played h3 instead of knight d5. Knight b4 from Aronian. He said, I decided on this move after I had rejected bishop e6 because of knight d5, bishop takes, e takes, then knight b4 and then g4. And Aronian says this is hardly anything to worry about, but I did not want to go in for any forcing variations since Magnus had made his moves quite quickly. And that's why Aronian rejected this variation. So instead of bishop e6 after white's move h2, h3, Aronian played knight b4 on the 11th move. Knight e2. Aronian says this knight maneuver, a normal one in the Ruy-Lopez, that knight will go to g3, also suggests itself here, in view of the presence of the uninvited guest on b4. As we'll see, Carlsen is going to kick back that uninvited guest later with c2, c3. c5 from Aronian, and now knight g3. Aronian gives this variation. If you play c3 instead, as planned, then there is knight takes d3, queen takes, c4, winning the piece back, bishop takes, b takes, queen takes, bishop e6, queen d3, and queen c7 is the end of this variation, with definite compensation for black, writes Aronian, so that after c5 and then c3. In the game, knight g3 was played by Carlsen, as mentioned, bishop e6, that bishop was taken, f takes, now the knight was kicked, knight back to c6, and Aronian writes, the resulting position very much resembles certain lines of the anti-martial. I was happy to reach a middle game where the approximate plans and ideas of both sides were familiar to me. Here Carlsen played rook e1, and Aronian says, this move greatly surprised me. I thought that my opponent had decided to manage without it. He played queen d7, a normal consolidating move in this type of setup, writes Aronian, and now d4, which Aronian calls an ambitious decision. Magnus probably did not imagine that by giving up the center, black would gain the better chances. He says, I think that some developing move like bishop d2, this move, should have been preferred. So Aronian did not like that move d4 from Carlsen very much. White gets the center now after e takes, c takes, and then c4. Very nice center for white, but Aronian writes, since black has an active idea involving knight b4, the conceding of the center is not dangerous for him. Bishop g5 from Carlsen. That bishop was kicked, and now d5. Aronian writes, this attempt to gain relief by exchanges does not bring the desired result, and he thinks that Carlsen should have played the bishop back to d2 instead. White is only a tiny bit worse then, says Aronian. But Carlsen played d5, that pawn was taken, and if you take on d5 there is knight b4, and black's initiative is too strong, says Aronian. So instead of taking on d5, Carlsen took on f6, bishop recaptures, and he took on d5 with the queen, with check. Rook interposes, and now queen back to d2. Aronian shows that knight f5 unfortunately does not work for white because of knight b4 hitting the queen, queen takes, knight takes, attacking the rook, so rook d7 attacking the knight, e5 and then knight c2, and black wins an exchange. That's why after rook f7 knight f5 is not possible, and Carlsen played queen d2 instead. Knight e5 from Aronian, that knight was swapped, bishop recaptures, knight back to e2, and rook b to f8, attacking the f2 pawn with both rooks, so rook f1, and Aronian writes, white only requires a couple more moves to consolidate, but here suddenly black has a strong resource, and this is quite an amazing move that comes on the board now. Rook f7 to f3. What a shot. Black has the majority on the queen side. Carlsen has a majority in the center, which he wants to put in motion with f2, f4, but with that amazing move, rook f3, Aronian prevents this. And what if you just take that rook? You can take it, but then there is rook takes f3, and look at black's pieces. They are all over white's king, and white is not going to survive this. White can play queen d5 check, king h7, rook a8, trying to counter-attack black's king, but there is queen takes h3, you have a check, king g6, another check, king g5, one more check, king h5, and this is the last check. After g6, white has run out of checks and white's king will get checkmated. That's why you cannot take the rook after rook f3. Carlsen saw that and he played rook a3. Aronian says this does not work, but white was already in trouble. Aronian took on a3, b takes, and black now has a deadly passed pawn on c3. Queen c6, knight d4, that knight was taken, and Aronian says, since I saw that it was very difficult for white to hold on to both a and e pawns, I did not bother to look for other moves. That's why he took on d4, keep it simple. The queen recaptured, now rook a8 attacking the a3 pawn, and Aronian thinks that queen b2 was the only move to confuse matters, but Carlsen played rook a1 instead on move 31. The game goes on with c3, queen b4, queen c5, queen b3 check, king h8, rook a2, white is trying to keep everything together, rook a4, which is attacking the e4 pawn, and both white pieces have to keep the a pawn protected. So how do you protect that pawn? You can't do it with f2, f3, that's an illegal move, so white is going to lose a pawn. Carlsen chose rook e2, he chose to keep the e pawn, but then he lost the a pawn, queen d1, and rook back to a8. And at this moment, after move 36, Carlsen resigned. The connected passed pawns are too strong. As we saw, Carlsen came back from this devastating defeat with white in the first game, but in the end Aronian prevailed in a tie-break and went on to qualify for the World Championship tournament, which was won by Anand, who became the 15th undisputed world champion. I covered that event in my series on the World Championship matches. The link is up here. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll keep counting down towards the resumption of the 2021 Candidates Tournament with me. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you liked the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter and on Facebook. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.